we are recognizing that if you're doing something new and you're presenting it to colleagues who are very good at what they do, for anybody really, you feel a little bit vulnerable. It's like you're kind of exposing something. So if you recognize that, then one of the issues is how do you keep the power out of the room? The second one is that the room and the people in the room cannot tell them what to do. Can't tell the director or the creative team with the director how to solve the problem. And frankly, with a lot of problems, the thing at the moment you think is a problem is actually because of something else.
Mm-hmm.
Like with storytelling, you set things up. The symptom may not be the problem, just maybe you got something else you have to fix. One really has to be candid. You can't hold things back.
Ed Catmull, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much.
I want to start at the end. Literally the end of this marvelous book, Creativity Inc. Of course, it's 10-year anniversary, a classic for all of those years. And at the end of the book, you write an afterword. It's called The Steve We Knew. You're referring, of course, to Steve Jobs, who you worked with 25, 26 years, probably longer than anybody else in a professional setting, a close setting for that long. You have a unique perspective to offer. I wonder, if you could just share a few thoughts as to why you wrote that essay and your thoughts about it in general.
Well, the reason I wrote it is there were a perception of Steve that came from his early years. And the perceptions are the kinds of things that you might write about or make movies about and so forth, but they don't actually capture the arc of his life. And there's a reason why they don't capture it. Frankly, Steve went through some significant changes and growth in his life. And when he did that, the people who were with him stayed with him for the rest of his life. And so when things started to be written about Steve or people talked about him, those of us who knew him were not about to talk about him or psychoanalyze him while he was still alive. He was our friend. So that part of the story was missing. And it really bothered me that people have these misconceptions about Steve and how he thought, how he worked, because it was very remarkable and doesn't match up with the things that we're talking about him from his early part of his life.
There's this appalling media coverage of Steve that paints him through the lens of his earliest version, the least mature, the least visionary, really. Certainly not the Steve that people did the very best work of their lives for. But they never outgrew the story. He outgrew it, but they didn't outgrow it. And those that know him best, I've worked with quite a few of them, and it's almost unrecognizable, the version that was emphasized and the version they experienced. That seemed, as I was reading this essay, to be your experience, your thoughts.
Yes. Well, the first thing was that I met Steve and knew him when he did have some of those characteristics that people read about. And I did experience some of them. And I wondered at the time, would he actually grow out of those? Would he get better empathy? Would he be able to listen better? And to be honest, I didn't know at the beginning.
Right.
So it was a background question. And when he formed two companies, basically, after he left Apple, one of them he formed immediately, which was Next. And the other was a year later when he acquired Pixar from Lucasfilm. So with Next, he was basically in the same kind of business that he'd been in before and trying to do something that was a lot better. And over the years at Next, you could say that when it came to the software, he made some brilliant decisions, brought in some brilliant people, and it ultimately led to the thing where that it led to the thing that Apple wanted. It was the reason that Apple bought Next, was because of that software. When it came to the hardware decisions, they were questionable. Some were good, some not so good, but he learned in the process. And with his business decisions, some of them, while a few were good, there were some fairly large mistakes. But the thing about Steve, which I was watching, was that as he was going through this, he was really learning. He was taking big lessons from the things that weren't working. And as he went through this, you could begin to see a change because he was incorporating the experiences, including the things that didn't work, in the way he thought. And I think just as important was understanding why he may have made the mistake and how he could think about relationships in the future. That was the next side. Now, on the Pixar side, he acquired us, and it was interesting because we didn't really have much of a business. Perfectly honest, there wasn't just high risk in a VC kind of view, but it was because he believed that graphics was going to become important some point in the future. Now, that distinguishes him from other people. He's not thinking about, how do I turn this into a great business now? I mean, yes, he wanted us to succeed and to figure out how to make money because we were the most costly investment he ever made in his life. So it was definitely a challenge, but he did it because he was looking far off into the future. That's pretty unusual. So that was the beginning of our relationship with him.
There are so many things that you wrote, and I think I just want to even capture some of the precise language that you used because it really, I thought was well done. You said, while many of the anecdotes people repeat about his behavior as a young executive are probably accurate, the overall portrait is way off the mark. The reality is Steve changed profoundly in the years that I knew him. Now, I want to talk in a moment about how he changed, but I wonder if you could just describe, I mean, if I'm reading the narrative right and under, the underlying narrative, I think that you feel you may have helped to mentor him in these particular leadership gaps. Maybe that's beyond what you're trying to say, but I think that he learned from Pixar and from getting married and his family a very different version of leadership than he had before. I wonder if you could share your reaction and thoughts to that.
Well, I would never call myself a mentor to Steve. I do feel like the style that we had was very different in the way we interacted with him than other people did.
In what way?
Well, the one thing was he did know and appreciate that on the technology of computer graphics, that the group that we had assembled over the years at Pixar was the best in the world. Like this was the world class group, and Steve was what I could see. Steve was always respectful of the knowledge that others had, and he didn't assume that he knew more than other people did. But I've seen this in case after case. He didn't come in as a know-it-all. He had a strong personality. Yes, he could articulate himself very well and express his view, but he never pretended to know what others didn't. And he knew that this was an unusual group. He also knew that we had a different approach. This is something I started back at New York Tech and continued on at Lucasfilm, which was that we published everything we did. Now, Steve is known to be secretive, but at New York Tech, we published everything, and there was a logic to it. The logic was, I believe that if you connect deeply with your community of peers on the outside, But you get a better view of the world and you get the best people because people want to come to that kind of environment. Then I went to Lucasfilm, and George was fine with it because that was his goal, was to actually change the industry. And then Steve bought Pixar. And we again published everything we ever did. Steve never challenged that. Now, he's known to be secretive, but he never questioned that decision because he understood that we were doing something different. So that was one stylistic thing where you could see, okay, that's a different way of working. The other one was that with Steve, I never had an argument with him. I disagreed frequently, but my style of disagreeing was a different style for him. And the only reason we could get away with it was because everybody was so damn smart there. But I don't argue with people. So if we disagreed, then and I could not think as fast as he could, and I'm not nearly as articulate. I can't even say any sentence without making some mistake. Never been able to. So to try to argue with somebody is actually a counterproductive for me. So instead, I would say
it's a weaker strategy for you.
Yes, but the thing was, I was always honest with him. So I would say what I think, but I couldn't necessarily make the best argument for it. So I would say, let me get back to you. And then I would wait maybe a week to come up with the next sentence. And then I would I'd bring it up, and you usually shoot it down right away. Let me get back to you. So these discussions might go on for weeks and sometimes months. And there'd be one of three outcomes, about equally likely. One third of them was where I would say, oh, I see what you're saying. You're right. Then that's the end of the discussion. The other third of the time, he would say, oh, I see what you're saying. And that's the end of the discussion. But the other third, where we didn't reach a conclusion, I just did what I wanted. And he was okay with that because we had discussed it.
Mm-hmm.
So it was just a different style.
Well, but what's so striking to me about it is that you seem to have figured out a way to plus all the good things he was bringing and neutralize some of the things that made him tricky in the early days for some people to work with him. It seems like your style and maybe the style of the Pixar team as a whole just helped to, I don't know the right phrase, but kind of filter. It was like a filtering for Steve somehow, that it helped him to become better and helped Pixar to become better and created this success cycle. Am I reading that right? How am I getting it wrong?
You are. It is right, but it's based on something in which I did see early on with him, was that whenever he saw something where he realized he was wrong, he would change on a dime. That is, deep down inside, right at the very beginning, he always knew there was no percentage in being wrong. So as soon as he got the fact that he was wrong, he wouldn't hang on anymore. Now, that's not a normal characteristic.
There's no percentage in being wrong. It's a really nice turn of phrase there, Ed. But you're right. It's not what people normally do. I've seen, and I'm sure I've participated in arguments myself in which you fight for the thing that you want to be right rather than to get it right, which seems to have been quite a distinctive thing for Steve, that he wanted to get it right more than he wanted to be right.
And yes, and that principle is so incredibly important, and it led to a number of things at Apple, all the way through the rest of his life, which turned out to be fundamental, and people still don't get about him. Is that he will argue a point. He's extremely articulate about arguing the point, and he does come up with the viewpoint right away. But as soon as he realizes that it's the wrong one, he doesn't hang on to it. That's nothing to do with him being right. it's actually getting to the right place. And that distinction between, putting out something and then proving you're right as made between that and actually getting to the truth, getting to the right thing, is a very important one. And it was fundamental to the way we made our films. And Steve really got that. He appreciated that in the way we work and the way the directors work. And he said at one point, says that, if he ever dies, he'd like to come back as a Pixar director. Because the basic principle is, you put out something new, you don't know if it's going to work. You are trying to make it work, but you need to have mechanisms around you to get to the right place. And since you don't know, how do you interact with the people? How do you get other people in there who are going to both commit and let go when it's wrong? Now, it's almost like I'm getting abstract here, but
no, I love this specific idea. So please continue.
So if you come up with, let's say, an idea for something, whether it's a product or a film, then what we want in the leader or a director is a strong commitment to make this work. Now, but you've got input coming in from other people. They could be viewers, customers, partners, who see things in a different way, and they might disagree with you. Now, you're committed. You're demonstrating the commitment, and everybody needs that commitment. And then as soon as you realize you're wrong, boom, you switch. So what does it mean to be both committed and at the same time being able to acknowledge when it doesn't work? I don't even call it being wrong. It's not even a matter of being wrong. Sometimes, like, it doesn't work. Let it go and move on. That's a hard thing for people to do. What are the mechanisms that any company puts together in order to get to the point where people can do that well? And I think that in a lot of cases, they don't put the right processes in place. But Steve understood the concept. And his way of doing it at Apple was very different than it was at Pixar. But the concept of how do you get people around you to challenge and drive you to get the right thing, and then how do you let go when actually you discover they've seen something you haven't seen?
Well, and it's that particular thing, that rapid letting go, that seems to be a particular strength for Steve and seemed to be this connective tissue between him and then all the directors at Pixar, because it's the same strength. You write about it. How does somebody listening to this develop that ability to let go on a dime, to immediately let go of the thing that is wrong, or the thing that isn't working, or the thing that's less correct than something that they have now learned?
Well, I know in the case of Pixar, we had one mechanism for doing it. It's actually a series of mechanisms to get there. And Steve had a very different style in running Apple. And when he interacted with Pixar, we had a way for him to use his style at Pixar. Not in the making of the movies. He had an unexpected and unusual role with the films. But in terms of the way he works, the best example I can think of is that Pixar was a public company for 10 years. And during that 10 years, Steve fired 2 members of the board of directors. And the reason he fired them was they never disagreed with him. And he said, if they don't disagree with me, then they aren't really bringing any value to the company. Now, this is a subtle but important concept. Is he wants people around who it isn't just they're argumentative. That isn't what he means. What he means is that when they have a viewpoint, they can express it. And then when you're discussing it, maybe even what may appear to be arguing, it's really not. It's like different viewpoints colliding, trying to get to the truth of the underlying matter. And when you've got a group that knows how to push back and appreciates that, with anybody willing to let go of something because their ego isn't on the line, the truth is on the line. And if you put that in place, you end up with a very robust group. And the way that Steve would do it was, the kind of people he assembled and the way they would disagree with him, because the people around him knew how to disagree, and they did disagree. And at Pixar, we had a different style of doing that. But if you think about one thing, which the issue, of course, is when he went back to Apple, then everything became very secretive again, because Apple's a secretive organization.
Sure.
But if you look at the emergence of the iPhone, so it's a beautiful example.
Yeah.
So the Apple has gone through this incredible growth and its resurgence because of its its desktop computers and its laptops and portables. But Steve said, okay, we're reaching the limits of how that business can grow. So we'll need to switch to a different, not just a new technology, but to a different business model.
Mm-hmm.
So he went back to his team, and he thought the next step was to go with the iPad. His team didn't agree. And after these disagreements, then he realized they were right. And so they came out with the phone instead. Okay. Now there's another set of disagreements that went on, and that was, should the App Store, or should the apps be open or closed?
Mm-hmm.
With Steve wanting to be closed. And when the phone came out, it was announced as being closed and, basically Apple controlled.
Right.
Within a few months, they realized they were wrong, and like 3 or 4 months in, they started working on the Apple Store. But the real point was, he had these disagreements. He prevailed in one. He realized they were right in the other. He's still the CEO. He still has to make the decision. But he had people around who were basically expressing a different viewpoint while they're trying to figure out the truth. Now, for the people who didn't agree on any of those, were they fired because they disagreed? No.
Right.
That was their value, and he knew that. So he could go through those changes with the group of people who would have lively and intense discussions. I wasn't in those meetings. I was only in the board of directors of Pixar. And also know that the people at Apple say that he was, probably more relaxed, a little different at Pixar than he was at Apple.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying he was the same everywhere, but frankly, his heart was in that market. Starting at Apple, and I knew this all these years we were with him. It's like, that's where his real heart is. That's what he really cares about deep down inside. But, I watched him Pixar and how he worked, and his role with us was actually the protector. And it was actually great that Steve Jobs is your protector.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But also it's protection and challenging.
Challenging internally, but then having loyalty externally.
Yes, that's right. So as the chairman of the board of directors, the chairman and CEO of Pixar, he's the one that dealt with the outside world. He's the one that negotiated with Disney. But inside, he didn't tell us how to do things. Now, I make this comparison with the brain trust, because the brain trust was a different mechanism for getting to the truth.
For those that don't know what the brain trust is, can you just share a little bit about that unique creation at Pixar?
Yes. So it happened almost by accident. So we first started off, and our first few films, we had, besides having some remarkably creative people together working on these films, we got some pushback from Disney. So mainly at the beginning, it was Tom Schumacher, who later went to New York to be over the theatrical. So Tom was very good at giving us drive. And we recognized there was value in Tom's pushing back. He had a vested interest in our success. He gave good notes, didn't tell us what to do, but there was some value to us in having that external thing, and he wasn't lost in our films.
Mm-hmm.
We started to do better and better, and Disney started to go downhill, and he had moved back to New York, as I mentioned. Tom moved to New York, and we realized, and Andrew Stan had realized, we were going to lose this external force.
Mm-hmm.
Because if your only decision making is internal, you can get lost in your own thinking. You can get caught up in it, and there's a whole variety of complex human emotions that are involved in making these projects. But the result is you can get lost in it.
And just before going further, I want to hear now the further development of it. But just to pause on that moment, I think about all of the people who, when they go to the White House, suddenly and immediately can get disconnected from what everyone else is actually dealing with in the real world because of this sort of, theme that you're describing. And I think that's just an example writ large of a phenomenon where leaders get out of touch with the people they're supposed to lead. Because of the fact that they are now the leader. So it's a cycle that I think is really challenging to not fall into. It's the default pattern. And it sounds like the brain trust was a part of the antidote to that problem. What am I guessing wrong?
No, that's exactly right. It's the thing that most people don't understand is that it's one thing to look at it from the outside or even work side by side with it. But when you've got the mantle, it alters your perception of reality. It's not what you thought. And, so many companies, this happens where people have got a notion of what they should do as a leader or the notion of what it means to be right or give advice to people or tell them what to do. And a lot of damage happens because they get the concept of what the job is wrong.
Right.
So now we're making films, in this case, we did value somebody from the outside telling us when we were screwing up. It didn't mean they were right either, but if they told us that, that was valuable.
Well, it makes you pause, it makes you think. You have to get out of your own head and not be stuck in your own head. And I think that's an error for everybody, but with leaders, it's easier perhaps to do in some ways, and the costs are higher if you make that mistake. Carry on.
So with this notion, and I think that's one of the reasons Pixar had such an incredibly long run, is people that understood that issue of getting lost in what you're doing applies all over the place and in different levels. So initially the thought was, okay, as we have new directors developing, who's going to provide them that feedback? So the idea was that the original group of directors who worked so well together would do that. And Andrew Stanton, who is the one who directed Finding Nemo and Wall-E, he said, well, that group will do it. And he called it the Brain Trust. So the name stuck. Okay, here's the interesting part. That didn't work. That is, because they were in the building, they also got lost in the film. So serving the role as the outside force to correct things didn't work. But internally, it was an incredibly powerful problem-solving group. So we began to develop, as we grew, the rules of engagements. Like, how does this group work together? And we figured like 4 or 5 things that were critical, that were very important. Now, so I can come back to what those were and why it was so important. But when it came to the outside force, what we did was we had Steve Jobs be that force. Now, and I'd asked Steve, I said, I would like you to not come to any of the Brain Trust meetings. And he didn't. Now, he was curious about it. He would like to have. That's nature.
You set a boundary with Steve Jobs and lived to tell the tale. Ed, it was an impressive decision. In and of itself, it was
the
smart.
thing was like, so say he was so smart, he didn't understand the reason, because one of the things that's a rule in this meeting and what made it so powerful was that we kept power out of the room. The brain trust could not tell the director how to solve the problem, and nobody in there could do it. And so this was a problem-solving session. We were raising issues and suggestions to be made, but the director did not have to take anything from that film. And we worked very hard to preserve that. Now, the truth is, there were some people who did have power, and their ability to speak and articulate was so strong that it was power, and it was powerful. So for those people, the rule was they had to shut the hell up for the first 10 to 15 minutes. The reason was, which we understood, was that if a powerful person starts speaking, they've now set the tone for the conversation or for the discussion. And so it was...
They framed the discussion. They framed what can be discussed and what can't be and what opinions one needs to have and so on right from the beginning.
Yes. So the principle is, if you enter a discussion after it's going, that's a different animal entirely. And I understood that. You enter, and because now you can respond as other things are coming up. And the relationship is sort of set in the right way. Now, having said that, Steve was so articulate and powerful that he couldn't have come in at any time in a meeting and not changed it. And he knew that. I mean, he's extremely self-aware. It's like, it wouldn't work. It's not a matter, even if he were to sit and bide his time for 20 minutes, when he spoke, all heads snapped over. But we did have board of directors meetings, and we would show the film to the board of directors. That's when Steve would see the film. So every time we had one of these screenings, and now to somebody who is articulate, then he would always call me the morning of. I was usually working out at the time. And he would say, "Ed, how's it going?" And I would say, "It's actually going pretty well." Good to hear that. End of discussions, really short. Or I might say, "We have problems." He'd say, "Good to know," in the discussion. I never told Steve what to think. Oh, because we needed him, to be spontaneous.
To be fresh. Yeah.
So all he knew was, based upon my watching other people, we were having a serious problem. So then he would watch the movie. We would come into the board of directors meeting, and he would start by saying, he said, "I am not a filmmaker, so you can ignore anything I say." And he actually meant that. He's not a filmmaker, and they could ignore what he said because he wasn't experienced in what he did. But then he would say these really articulate things, and he could say them so articulately and so beautifully that it was like a gut punch. This was the outside force.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the interesting phenomenon that I watched is that a lot of the directors said they heard Steve say things and observe things that they had never heard before. Okay, now what was interesting about it is I'm in all the meetings. I've heard everybody talk.
Right.
There was never anything that Steve ever commented on, ever, that had not been said by some of the other filmmakers in these meetings.
That's really interesting.
Because if people are good and they work with each other and they like each other, they also learn how to dismiss or not hear each other. So, but you couldn't dismiss Steve. But in addition, because Steve by this time had become really empathetic and very tuned into what people were thinking, he could see if his comments were rattling to the director. And so at the end, he'd say, let's go for a walk. And he'd go for a walk around there, our building. So like, that's not the Steve that people normally think of. That's
he became a much better reader of people. This is, I think, what part of the theme you're saying with him and his journey, that he could read the room, read the sometimes even very nuanced things in people. That's not the description of a tyrant, as you know, occasionally can be presented in media. Now, tell me, you referenced 3 or 4 things, rules that the Brain Trust developed, internal dynamics, something like that.
Yes.
You said you could come back to. Can you share more about that? What were those rules for the human dynamic?
Well, first of all, we are recognizing that if you're doing something new and you're presenting it to colleagues who are very good at what they do, that for anybody really, you feel a little bit vulnerable. It's like you're kind of exposing something, because at this point, with any of these projects, they're not really working right. And you know that. So you know it's not working, and you're presenting it to other people who are very good. So that means people in general can feel a little, vulnerable, and they're putting themselves out. So if you recognize that, then one of the issues is the first time I mentioned is, how do you keep the power out of the room?
Mm-hmm.
The second one is that the room and the people in the room cannot tell them what to do. Can't tell the director or the creative team with the director how to solve the problem. They can say, this is a problem, and there needs to be some way to address it. And you can't ignore it. But we're not going to tell you how to solve it. And frankly, with a lot of problems, the thing at the moment you think is a problem is actually because of something else.
Mm-hmm.
With storytelling, you set things up, right? Well, if they're not set up right, the symptom may not be the problem, just maybe you have something else you have to fix.
Mm-hmm.
So the other one is one really has to be candid. You can't hold things back.
Can I come back to that first, that second point that you were making there? Because I want to clarify something. So when they're in the meeting, when you say you can't tell someone how to solve it, were they not brainstorming possible solutions at all? But was it really all about problem finding and identifying those problems with them? Help me understand how clear or strict that rule was.
Oh, no, it was. They were definitely offering ideas and suggestions.
Okay. So there's constant brainstorming around what problems they see. They're participating in both, but they're not in control of the execution, of the selection or the execution of those solutions.
That's right. So in other words, they're not mandating anything.
Right.
And then you'll start to rip on something, and you might go down a thing. And in general, actually, there's also a fair amount of laughing in these films. And then sometimes the ideas go, too crazy. Then you sort of pull it back to center. But you are trying to make it so that the environment is free flowing. You'll move from problem to problem. You'll raise issues, offer suggestions. That will spark things. Like any good discussion, you're saying something, and all of a sudden, click, 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 things start to come together. And that's the way it should be. And what you're really trying to do is to protect that and allow it to happen. If you mandate something, then essentially people will come in a little defensive posture. It's like,
right.
You don't want the defensive posture. And so the whole purpose is to get rid of it. You're enabling people to listen.
Mm-hmm.
And you're allowing, basically, it gets everybody to listen, to throw things out. And, you throw out an idea, it may not work. And ideally, we don't always hit the ideal, frankly, but if you throw something out and it doesn't really work, if you don't cling to it, then if it doesn't work, you don't feel deflated if it doesn't work. It's like, it's okay.
It's learning.
And if your idea gets accepted, you don't feel puffed up because, I said something and they took it. Like, either one of those is not the right position to be in.
Right. You're trying. You said a few interesting things there, and I don't want to move on to sort of the next area, number 3, before we've just double clicked on this. For the subtitle to Creativity Inc. is about overcoming the unseen forces that stand in the way of true inspiration. And it seems to me that a really central leadership necessity is what you just said, what everybody's heard, but is so rarely achieved, where you get everyone to listen to everyone else. And there's that seems to connect the dots between Steve's journey from where he was before, so visionary and opinionated, but not a great listener, to the point he became a very powerful listener and produced systems and habits and culture that insisted that people were listening to each other and people had to hear each other. That's a thread. And I wonder, how central do you find this to be a part of Pixar's success? The creating the mechanisms that help people listen to each other. One of many things, or a central thing?
No, I would say one of many. There are other things that we need to also get right. These particular meetings were only held once per screening, and we might have 7 or 8 screenings per film.
Mm-hmm.
And there are other things that took place around this. So the Brain Trust, while it started off as a group of people, turned into a way of running meetings which either took place after the screening or on a 2-day offsite.
Mm-hmm.
So with that, it's okay, this is how we work now. I mean, sometimes you had to make hard decisions, but we didn't do the hard decisions in those meetings. And frankly, we tried to avoid making the hard decisions about a film in the window before and after the film. And the reason was we didn't want it to get overloaded with people being afraid of what might happen.
Mm-hmm.
That room had to feel like this is a place that was safe. You could listen and throw things out, and it was all okay.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes, frankly, there were disasters on films. We didn't make them part of the Brain Trust. It was a separate thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were separate issues about how do we actually get the passion lined up, and what we did to make that work. Like, what's the qualifications that we look? What were the things we looked for in a director?
Mm-hmm.
How we encourage that, how their creativity. So it was like any company. Like, there isn't a single bullet. There's a bunch of things you got to put in place. But this is a critical one.
Mm-hmm.
Because this is about getting to something which is going to work and allowing yourself to change when it doesn't. Because when you're doing something new and creative, a lot of what you do doesn't work.
Tell us, move us on to number 3, the candid, the why being candid with each other matters so much.
Well, there are times when people have felt like that something was not good at all, and they didn't want to embarrass somebody or things of that sort. So there's human psychological things that are going on.
Mm-hmm.
The rule is you really need to say what you think.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need to say it harshly or badly. I mean, you wouldn't say this sucks. You don't do that.
Mm.
But you can say, this doesn't work, and give your reasons why you think it doesn't. You got to say what you think. And I've been to those meetings where people don't say what they think, and there are a variety of reasons why people may not be forthcoming with it. And sometimes you're reading the body language. Sometimes it's like, what's going on? And actually, that is my job. I mean, it's fun to give notes on a film, but it wasn't my job. My job was to look at the dynamics of the room. And the thing about the dynamics of the room is that it doesn't mean, well, I can mind read because I can't. I can look for clues. If I can see clues, then we may have to, I'll go check afterwards. And I would say that most of the time, as evidenced by the films, the process worked very well. But there were times when it went off the rails. And others might say it went off the rails too, in which case we may reconvene. But in that case, we'd reconvene with a smaller group. Because, as you know, when you have a bigger group, the dynamics within it change.
What was the size of the bigger group and the smaller group?
Well, a smaller group might be, say, 10, 12 people. And the big one might be, say, 25 people.
25 is quite a lot to have in a room where you're trying to just give feedback and have a discussion about what's working and what's not. I can see the need for the smaller, for a smaller group, when that's required.
Yeah, if things are going moderately well, we would use a bigger group because we're also trying to expose other people and train other people for what it means to participate in a group that's run well, so they had more confidence in it, and they realized that nobody's being attacked. And so if you experience this, then you're better prepared when you're to do this.
Right.
But if it's if you're in a real tricky problem, then you've got to go down to this smaller core group to do it, because at that point it's not actually a matter of exposing people. A serious problem that needs to be solved.
Now, this sounds like a segue, but it's not. You retired in 2019. Is that correct? Did I get that right? And what has your involvement at Pixar been since then? Are you still involved, but in a different role? Has it eventually led to very little involvement, or how would you describe your current connection?
Oh, when I retired, I'd already put people in place to succeed me. I'd worked on that for a long time. And when you do that, okay, it's time to let them do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, but then at the same time, just get retired, and then COVID hits, which amplifies streaming. So the people to solve problems is still there, but to be honest, like a whole bunch of things hit all at once. So, but I wasn't there for it because with COVID, then it was essentially theirs to solve. And, these are hard problems, but these are also good problem-solving people.
Okay,
but
so
that's not all. I have no exposure.
Okay, got it. So I'm actually familiar with some of the work that you did over those years before retirement to try to solve what I was told you believed was the biggest single threat to Pixar going forward, which is that the original group of directors is not going to be there. And every movie had some point of serious inflection point where those original group ends up coming back together and trying to go through a problem-solving process to get it where you want it to be. And so that you'd taken it really seriously to try to address this problem of, well, what happens once we all go? How can it continue? So first of all, let's see if what I understand is approximately right, that's sort of how you saw the biggest challenge, and that this is why you invested so much to try to think about this succession planning and the processes to put in place. Your reactions to that first.
Okay, I actually missed what the question was in that.
The question is that the correct reading of how you were working on it through those years?
Yes, because we knew that there was one group that was doing it's like the back route for everybody and teaching others and so forth. And then as we brought others in, we were finding that they again had a very different set of characteristics, and one has to assume that they bring something to the table we didn't see, and it's new. And we can't have the company continue to be even any kind of replica of the first one, because that isn't the way it works if you're doing something creative.
Mm-hmm.
So the people have to change. So the principles were, okay, how do we find people who are passionate and support them? And the one thing I did know was that starting way back when I was in graduate school, and then at New York Tech, and then at Lucasfilm, and then Steve, and then with Disney, I really had support. So I felt like, okay, my job, our job, was to provide support for new people and for new ways of doing things. But that takes time to do that. So my support wasn't because one day somebody showed up and did something. It's like, no, this continued over years. And for every one of us, it's like, this was a process. Nobody magically rose to the top. Even Steve, we started talking about Steve, but Steve went through years of going through things and growing. And as a result of the things that he learned over time, because he had all these elements in place that let him learn, then he basically could transform. Well, what do we do for other people? How are we supporting them? How do we think about them? And that's what we tried to set up, at every level of the company. It wasn't just the creative side. How do we think about the technical side? How do we think about the production management or marketing?
Yeah, it's really curious to look at it now from a few years on. I know that Steve was affected by what happened at Disney when Walt Disney died unexpectedly, and the challenges that faced the company without the visionary, without the person that was pushing and polishing and prodding and probing to make it better. And so it was one of the reasons he built Apple University, was to try and make sure that the thinking could continue and the understanding of why decisions were made and so on. But meanwhile, the same thing has been happening at Pixar, or at least one could argue this is the case, because that original group of unusually gifted directors, and then also just that process of decision making together, you've all had to shift past it. And I wonder, how would you evaluate Pixar in those years? I mean, it's a tricky question I'm asking, I get that, but how well has Pixar continued to do the things that led to Pixar's extraordinary success over that first generation?
Well, the thing I liked was all the way up until I left, they were still making some really great films. Now, there were a lot of the original people still there, but the other people are now engaged and involved with it, including new people that weren't part of the original group. And so the ideal one is there's an intermingling, but it's also a passing on. I mean, it's probably not right to say passing on cultural values. It's more like the value is that we're going to continue to change, and that what we're doing now can't be like it was at the beginning. Right? We can't be the first at anything again. You have to be the first at something else.
Mm-hmm.
And with each one of them, it's like, okay, a refinement. You go back and you look at it. Did this work? So then there's a question of, do we keep on being, or working on being self-aware of what works and what doesn't work? Because my own view is that some people are looking for like the sweet spot. And because at one side, like you hang on to what worked and you don't let go, and the other is you go off in some wild ass and different. So these are like this that place you get where you are addressing new things, but that's not a stable place. In fact, if you look at in this industry, and I would argue in a lot of industries, then the leadership is changing, the expertise is changing, the technology is changing, the customers are changing, expectations changing. there is nothing in this picture that is stable.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you deeply understand that, then you think about how you have to address problems in a different way. You're not trying to find the new stable point. You're trying to be the kind of company that's robust and is continuing to change.
Mm-hmm. So I love everything you just described, and now I want to be more precise in the question. Do you think Pixar is doing as well today as they did when you were there with the original Brain Trust? Do you think it has continued in the same level of success, or do you see some cracks in the, some cracks in the system? Let's say.
Well, one of the ways that we were measured in the past, because there was a succession of 4 films in a row that redefined Pixar not as a very good animation studio, but as a company that produced Pixar films, which caught me off guard.
So what does that mean?
Well, what it meant was that as we were having successful films that were being reviewed, because there are other animated films that are out there.
Sure.
At some point, our worry was we were going to produce something which didn't do well.
Huh.
And that was, right after the first film, that was my worry. Like, what's going to happen? Because you can't keep producing good films. And I knew that people were, it's almost like gunning for us. So you could see it in some of the reviewers, like, okay, nobody deserves this.
Yes, suddenly you're not the underdog anymore. You're the king of the classroom, and so it becomes a little cooler to vote against you. But this is what you're saying was happening. Carry on.
So I could see this building, and I thought, okay, now at some point they're going to turn. This some not good is going to happen. And then our 8th film, which came out, was Ratatouille. And then it was
Wall-E.
Yeah, Wall-E.
Then Up.
And Toy Story 3.
Toy Story 3.
So those 4 films in a row were undeniably great films. And basically it was it kind of blew through this. And when I realized after this point, we weren't compared with other animation companies. We were a different category. And because it's still true, it's like when people look at it, they compare us against Pixar films.
Mm-hmm.
And even subsequent to that period, if a film came out, if it didn't live up to the Pixar standard, then it was, that was how they talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
So now with that in mind, when COVID hit and they switched to streaming, one of the things which was part of the definition of what a film was when the film opened, there was a lot of there were a lot of public things about the opening of the film, the box office, it's how much review, all those things that happened. Well, everything changed when I think the next 4 films were released on streaming, and it changed the perceptions of what people do. And then for a lot of films, it's like, do you go to the theaters because we'll just wait until it's streamed? So what that meant was that kind of thing got in the way. So do I think the films are extremely good? Yes, but that sort of buzz that happens, it wasn't the same as it was. So that was one of those, they say, they were hit with some things there. And I'm on the outside looking at it, thinking, well, it's one of the consequences of change. Actually, I'm talking about change. I, of course, in no way would ever predicted a pandemic, but I did know that the streaming was going to have a major impact.
And maybe you're saying the unintended consequence of that has been to affect, I'm putting words in your mouth, you can you can disagree, but has been an impact on the quality of the movies that have been produced.
No, I'm actually saying that. It's
Yeah,
like
okay.
perception changes. So even then, they film like Elemental, lately it was $400 million in the box office. So it actually did very well. But the perception on the outside people is, oh, it's not the same. Well, actually did really well. But, that's part of the ongoing change that comes with a combination of several different elements. So because I've been in this for a very long time, there were like 30 films, right? 31 or 32 films between Disney and Pixar. But to be honest, it was like in that sort of paradigm of how you change and how you bring up talent within that. But we had different forces that were at play. And there were a few along the way which were very challenging.
What was the most challenging one?
Pardon?
What was the most challenging movie that you were a part of?
Well, it's when I say challenging, it's like internally challenging. But
yes.
they were within the scope of things that we could manage. So
yes,
there were a few times in which we changed directors, and
that's a tough moment internally. I mean, that's a tough conversation to have with someone. They've poured their life into this. They've invested enormous amounts, and then you say, "Okay, you took it this far. We're moving to somebody completely different."
Yeah, and so that because it had the question, was that if you're asking for somebody to commit to make it happen and to pour their souls into it, then and you're supporting them, so that's the rule. You have to support them. And we all know that everything to begin with doesn't work very well. Right? It really does. We don't say that when we're giving the reviews, but they don't work very well.
Sure.
And we know that, and we're protecting them. What does it mean to say, okay, we're not going to protect it anymore? So,
yeah. At what point do you go, okay, we can't keep protecting you. It's actually a different person that's needed here.
Yeah. So we have done that a few times. And because there is one rule, there's an additional rule here. It's not a brain trust rule, but it's that that the one thing that a director can't do is to lose the confidence of their entire team. Okay.
So once you sensed that had happened, it's time to make a change.
Yes. Now, what normally happens is if there are problems, and there are problems,
sure,
then you are in some cases they just need the time to solve the problems. So some fall easily in that category, and then for some it's okay. Maybe the team isn't working well, so you do some adjustments. But frankly, these are all private, confidential. You can add somebody to the team because you're not trying to do anything to harm this creative team that's leading it, and you're trying to support them. That's what the support means. If that doesn't work and they lose the team, then that's when you have to do something larger. And each one is a very different story. So like with Ratatouille, it was a wonderful man that conceived the idea. It was a high-risk idea. We were very proud of the fact that we took on a very high-risk idea.
It seems natural now, but not at the time. I mean, the premise of the story is such an unusual premise, but it's an evidence of the execution in the end that everyone just, oh yes, Ratatouille, the rat that wants to cook in Paris. Like
this is a high risk idea,
right?
We believe that some of them, and not all of them, but some of them should fall in this category, and they would fail the elevator test. And this would be one of those who would have failed the elevator test. And which means that you've got to give it some room to solve the problem, because solving harder problems requires more creativity. So if you take on the challenge, you say, okay, we're going to solve this problem. So in this case, the basic premise was about art and the love of art. We call it cooking, but actually it's an artistic statement about passion. And the story was stuck. It was caught in circles, and they couldn't get out of it. And so we did have to make a change. Now, the basic premise of the movie that was in the film as it came out was the premise as originally pitched. The look of the characters was from that, led by that director. So everything about that looked like everything about the final film looked like the fruition of the original idea.
Mm-hmm.
But they were caught in a cycle, and they couldn't find their way out of the cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And so then we brought in Brad Bird, who loved the concept of the passion of the artist. That's what drew him in to be able to be willing even to take on this film. And so he met with a friend of his who's a writer, not even at Pixar, and they came up with the key breakthrough. And once they did that, it broke this cycle that was in there, and all of a sudden, boom, it turned into this beautiful, magnificent gem. So that's not the arc of other films.
Right.
So each one has a very different arc, and with Wally, not with Wally, with Up, which is Pete Docter's film, the final film bore no resemblance whatsoever to the original film.
Wow.
And the thing is, it doesn't matter. We don't care.
Mm-hmm.
None of us do. It's how do we have it so that we're enabling people to do something which is great.
Mm-hmm.
It may be solving the problem of the original idea, or even evolving the idea and turning it into something that's different.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what it means to be sort of be open and creative and supportive, and at the same time knowing, you have no idea where this is going.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why I say each one is a different arc. One of our newer directors who did Becoming Red. So newer director, high energy. She made a short film ahead of this called Bow. In my mind, it's the best short film that Pixar has ever made.
Wow.
It's truly stunning. So she brought this energy to it, and along with, something from her life, because she was raised in the Chinese community in Toronto. So that's the whole idea is you're open to all kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And the answer is, are they still doing it? Yes, they are. So that's what you're supposed to do. There's no formula.
Speaking of arcs, let's connect a few arcs here. So I think that there was one more rule that you used for Brain Trust that we didn't address. What was that rule?
Well, let's see. There was one of them was, it was peer-to-peer. There's the people in the room were people who had the respect from each other as filmmakers.
Mm-hmm.
So that was one. So it's peer-to-peer, keep the power out, keep the candor. I forget the other. So actually writing down these rules, it was trying to clarify them for others, but in our minds, it's actually a total package.
Yes.
Now, when I say it's a total package, there were other things because people did get lost in their own ideas, and they found it difficult to let go of it. So I mentioned, that outside force like Steve, but we did have a couple of other outside forces. One of them is once per film, we could do an audience screening.
Mm-hmm.
Now, with products, there are times when you get feedback. Some people are really good about trying to get genuine feedback. Some people actually don't want it. So in our case, we wanted it, but it comes late in the game. It's just different mechanisms to try to get there. And in the case of Pixar and Disney, this is late in the game where Inside Out, which is, this great film, but honest, it was stuck at some point. And in this case, everybody loved it. They were excited about it, and everybody knew there was something, and they couldn't figure out what was the problem. So with all the outside force, with all the inside forces, with all the creative strength, they couldn't figure out what the problem was. So the first time we said, let's go show it to the Disney Brain Trust. Now, we kept them quite separate. We wanted to make sure that Disney had its own personality. They did things in different ways. They talk with each other. They could beg, borrow, and steal ideas from each other, but they didn't have to.
Yes, I see. You wanted to keep it interdependent, but there was an independence underneath it.
Yeah, because they wanted each other to succeed, and everybody understood that if both of them were doing well, it was better for everybody. So there was no jealous whatever, so like that didn't happen. But we didn't actually show the movies to the Brain Trust. So the first time we showed it to the Brain Trust down there, and there are two people in particular who picked at the central problem that we had missed.
And
what
was that problem?
Oh, well, the problem was that Joy was working extremely hard to get back to headquarters, which is where she belonged. Like she needed to really be back there. But she was trying so hard to get there that it's almost like she appeared to be selfish and self-centered. It was about her. So the basic thing that was driving her was about her being back there. But the job was about getting her back there. So that's the reason people missed it. So that's what the group down there sort of picked at. And then once that was realized, then you could go to, and this is where you go to the deep level. You can say, well, everybody else wants her back there. So if you think about a child and, your child cries or is hurt or unhappy or sad, then a lot of parents would say, having been there, where's my happy girl? Where's my happy boy? And because everybody else wants Joy to be back there. So if everybody else wants it, they're the ones that can try to drive it, to push that. So in this case, Joy didn't need to be that kind of force in the movie. It could come from others. And once that was in there, it became more profound because then as an adult, you can say, oh, I've done that. And because we have, and for child psychologists, that's one of the issues is some parents can't accept the fact that their child is depressed or unhappy or anything like that. They're sort of almost demanding that they not be that way.
Yeah, not accepting or understanding or affirming where they are actually at. And so you were able to connect with that human emotion.
Yes, and when you do that, I said, okay, now this is a deeper movie. And so with those notes, Pete and his team could come back and make a large number of small changes, and now it really worked. So, okay, so we then said, okay, that worked. But we were having problems in the film down at Disney, which was Zootopia. Zootopia had some serious problem. And so we thought, well, if it worked going down to Disney, maybe we can do the reverse. So we brought it up to Pixar. And in this case, Andrew Stanton in particular, after saying nothing for 20 minutes, said something which actually blew the film open.
Which was?
Oh, well, in the original version, there was, because the predators worked together, there was always the worry that predators might revert to their dangerous state. So when they became adults, they need to wear these collars, and which would measure their state of aggression or alarm, and then it would shock them. And the question was, okay, how does society work? And the protagonist was the fox, and the arc of the story was that he was cynical, and by the end of the movie, he, basically he had learned, to first of all, they were going to remove black collars as an element in the film, after they reached. After the I'm not saying this right. The course of the movie was to figure out why this wasn't necessary. But the film wasn't working at all. And what made it, what got them stuck on it was there was a very powerful and emotional scene where the polar bears would first place the collar on their child. It was sort of like the coming of age party. But for the parents, it was like, it's kind of painful for them. And it's when the child realized this pain that came with becoming an adult. So with, when it was shown at Pixar, then, Andrew Stanton, when he spoke up, he said, when I saw those collars, then I hated that city, and there is nothing you could ever do to redeem it.
Mm-hmm.
This was inexcusable, and it made the film inherently ever unlikable. So just, boom, 2 before across the forehead. And the reason they were stuck on it was that they fell in love with that emotional thing. And so they then went back, and his view was he wanted them to understand and try to solve this problem. He wasn't telling them what to do. He was just saying, you've made this
Got to
story.
do something.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, it turns out there are people at Disney who had said that before, but they couldn't overcome the fact that they were stuck on something.
Right.
So in the end, it turns out Judy, the bunny, became the protagonist, and she had a deeper story, which is to learn that she had some biases that she didn't know about, and they came out. And so that was a deeper and more relevant theme for the movie. And it came about because somebody else was actually able to brush aside something that even others had said before, but he could push through it. Well, it's like whatever it takes.
Yes.
You're trying to get to the truth of what works.
Well, you're trying to get it right rather than be right. And many of these stories push to that theme, although it's not the only theme that we've covered. You've talked about the arc of a movie. We've talked also and began with the idea of the arc of Steve's life, and particularly the arc of his career and how it shifted materially, but more than the media story about him. Let me just read one thing that you wrote, and then maybe if you could share with us, you've sort of shared the beginning, but maybe you could share the last time that you talked with him on the phone and what that all meant. You write here, to let these media narratives, you wrote, to let these media narratives drive Steve's story is to miss the more important story. In the time I worked with Steve, he didn't just gain the kind of practical experience you would expect to acquire while running 2 dynamic, successful businesses. He also got smarter about when to stop pushing people and how to keep pushing them if necessary without breaking them. He became fairer and wiser, and his understanding of partnership deepened, in large part because of his marriage to Laureen and his relationship with the children he loved so much. This shift didn't lead him to abandon his famous commitment to innovation, it solidified it. At the same time, he developed into a kinder, more self-aware leader, and I think Pixar played a role in that development. Could you maybe respond to that here and then share with us maybe the last time that you were able to speak with Steve and what that meant to you?
As we went through this period for all these years, you see Steve starting to change, and also was learning from what took place at Next. But I would say there was that period of time. It was actually significant in a number of ways, but it was the years 1991 to 1995. So 1991 was when he got married to Laureen. His son Reed was born. We entered into the contract with Disney to make Toy Story. And that period of time was also when the industry as a whole, the entertainment industry, made this very rapid switch from no technology to all digital. So it was at this time when, in the middle of this, 93 is when Jurassic Park came out. And 95 was when Toy Story came out. But also, Pixar went public the week after the movie came out. And so Pixar was going public, was the first, financial success that Steve had since he left Apple. So you could see all these things like coming together. It's not like, as you know, with any period when there's a rapid change, it's not like that's when the change is. Like there's a build up, there's things that put it in place.
Slowly, then suddenly.
Yeah. So, in fact, I remember when Pixar was acquired from Lucasfilm, the day we signed the paperwork, the other co-founder of Pixar was Albert Ray Smith and me, and he put his arms around us and he said, whatever happens, we need to be loyal to each other. And I will say with Pixar, it was tough for a while. We failed as a hardware business. We weren't really making it in terms of our starting stuff like commercials. We were extremely aware of the rate of change with Moore's Law and when it would become economically practical. And we weren't ready yet. Like we knew all this stuff. So it was tough. And Steve did stay with us when I don't think certainly not any VC, because they're not, it's not their model for the way they work. I don't even mean this as criticism, but he was doing something quite different. And so we went through these brutal times together, but you could also see a bonding of within our company and with Steve growing over time until when we started in this relationship with Disney, which led to making the film and this thought process about what's going to take place afterwards and why. It was actually pretty remarkable. That's why I say those 4 years of 91, 95 were a pretty transformative years. And it was as we're getting close to going public, when Steve was saying that at the end of this, we will need to enter into a new relationship with Disney because Eisner, who was the CEO at the time, will realize that he's just created his worst nightmare. And he will need to renegotiate the deal because he will not want us to go because we only have a 3-picture deal. So he will need a longer one. So we will renegotiate, but we need to enter as equal partners. So unlike some things in the past where he shot to do something which is incredibly favorable to Next, which in the end not the right thing to do, that he said, when you do something with Disney, the high ground is to be equal. So that's part of the maturation.
Yes.
We're going to approach this in a very different way and did. And so as we're going through this, I was just thinking, this is pretty remarkable. First of all, he's thinking about what the consequences are of these changes. And he really called it exactly right because he was thinking about long-term consequences. So now, then once you become a company, at this point, Next is still there. So he's running Next, which, isn't a big success.
Sure.
And frankly, I was a little worried at the time because we were the sexy ones. But at the same time, I knew where his heart was.
Right.
And it wasn't until a couple of years later when Apple realized that he had the operating system that they needed, and then his thought processes behind it, again, were very remarkable, but they weren't just lucking into something. He was actually thinking way ahead. I mean, this guy doesn't have a quarterly bone in him. He's thinking, where are we going in several years, which is a unique skill to have when a lot of things are changing. And as you know, they're not slowing down.
No, they're not.
So how does one think about it? Because honestly, it's very hard for people to comprehend a high rate of change. And he's one who could do that. And I think it's one of the reasons that we hit it off was that right at the beginning, it's like, okay, we're on an arc here. This is an exponential curve. We know we've got our ways to go, and we're not deluding ourselves about it. And Steve had understood what exponential change meant in an unusual way. So I look at that period as the transformative one in which the way he worked with others and partners was very different than it was before. And so when he returned to Apple, it's like getting all that knowledge, what he'd learned with Next, what he'd learned with watching Apple, frankly, and his experiences at Apple, and then watching other products. So he could come in, and they brought in some, phenomenal people in terms of design and software, as well as this new way of thinking, which was a designed orientation. It's not the way most companies thought. So, everything about it was remarkable. So, this was the hero's journey.
I'm familiar enough with the people that have worked with Steve to know that some of them don't love the Isaacson biography because they feel it reinforced these stereotypes and prefer a different book called Becoming Steve Jobs, which seems to open up that explanation for why someone that used to be a sort of upstart visionary that gets fired from his own company is able to also later be the one that revolutionizes it, turns the company around, helps to partner with Pixar into a great success story. All of this, these don't add up. But in the Becoming Steve Jobs story, they seem to appreciate and understand the journey he went on, as you say, the hero's journey. I wonder if you have any specific reactions to just the biographies specifically.
Well, in terms of those two biographies, Isaacson is a brilliant writer. I mean, the issue there was that for the people that knew Steve, is that when they were interviewed, nobody was going to tell the story of what they saw. So while he was a brilliant writer, he wasn't actually giving the important information because, like when he called me, I wasn't going to talk about the story because Steve was still alive. I didn't know what's going to happen. So I'm answering the questions, but I'm not saying, okay, this is the important stuff. So his book focused more on it was a very important thing, but it was like the open systems of Microsoft world and closed systems of Apple. And that whole thing was a very important part of computer history, but nobody told a personal part to Steve. So she wasn't given the information. And I have no doubt his abilities if he were given it.
Sure.
In the case of Brent Schlendler, he actually had some serious disease when Steve was getting somebody. So I don't know if he'd have been considered or not. But Steve was unusual because he was a business reporter. And Steve, as part of the control of the story, didn't always have a great relationship with writers, but Brent was very unusual in that he completely got Steve, and he would also tell the truth. He wasn't going to be anybody's, toady or whatever, just say what they want. But he could do it in a way that he was, that Steve respected him. So over many years, I got to know Brent because he was one of the very few reporters that Steve would actually talk to more because he knew that Brent wasn't just, putting stuff out to fill some deadline or whatever. And I mean, as you know, in any industry. If you have to fill paper or material, you've got to sell things, and so the variance among the reporters on any media is, goes all over the place. But Brent was one of those that was very good, and because of that, he had an extremely good view of Steve, but also because of that, and he'd been there for a long time. A lot of these same people who were at Apple and me, and we knew Brent quite well. So Brent had a different picture.
The raw materials were different for him.
Yes, and the question with any writer is, okay, what is the picture you get? Because frankly, it's hard to get the picture. And with a lot of companies, you're trying to massage the image that goes out there. It's just the way it works, and you know that.
Yes.
So getting the deeper, sometimes more subtle stories is hard to come by. And I think one should be, as open and honest as possible, because I think it just serves you better. But I know how it works in places like that. And Steve liked to control the narrative. He understood from a PR point of view what that meant. And therefore, it took longer to figure that out. But Brent was around for a long time. He was way back.
Can you share with us, as we wrap up here, the last time you were able to speak with Steve?
Well, it was it was getting near the end, and so he was engaged quite a bit up until he resigned from the board. Then we had a few discussions since then, and then there was one time in which I was, downstairs, and I got the goodbye call, and I knew what it was. Was the thank you, but because he was so completely sharp and self-aware, and through none of this, there was no delusion or wasn't trying to fool himself. He knew what was happening. So, and it's emotional for me, but that was, he was going to his friends and just calling each of them.
Thank you for sharing it. You're emotional now talking about it.
Yeah, there are a few other emotional things too that I have regarding it. To say the things that I learned from him and working with him and the effect on me. That's why when we started at the beginning, it's like I was, in some ways a mentor. So, well, I wasn't the way I think about it. I thought of the person who protected and challenged. And it was part of growing my view of what my job was.
It seems to me that it is a really unusual kind of collaboration that you had with Steve, in a way that is exactly what one would hope from the best collaborations. Not just that you can create great things, do great things together, but that somehow it elevates beyond that, where you understand each other really at new levels, and that you edify each other, and that it becomes some kind of joy to work together, but it's more than the work itself. I may be reading too much into it, but it seems like that was the kind of long-term collaboration you had. It was beyond the work into something much more meaningful than that, and something that changed you both. That's my read. Am I guessing it wrong?
No, the thing I feel is the case, and was that for both of us, it was, we're trying to do something which is has an impact and it's done well, and you do that by by the relationships you have with people, the full acknowledgement of what they do and what they bring, and even though Pixar and Apple did it in different ways, at heart there was that in common, that we're not trying to do this because it's important to be in charge. It's important to do something good. And I say that because I know that's the words that anybody might use about what they would want to do, but it's just, but I think, okay, that is actually the way that the two places worked. And I'm very aware also that sometimes the narrative turns around the visible people, like in our case it could be directors or Steve, or because I've written a book around me, but I was always aware in discussion with Steve, it's like a full appreciation for what others do. And the narrative about it is one thing, but it's how does that really work, and how deep is the appreciation and the gratitude for your partners and your friends and those you're with, and honestly, the partners, it's even broader. It's like, okay, in my case, like my friends in universities and in that community, it's like, okay, what is this like? And it always worries me, because sometimes the simplified story is the one that takes place. But when I talk with Steve, and I'd say a lot of people don't think that he was doing this, but I know from the conversations, the way he talked about other people, and in particular, like those at Disney, where we were more likely to have discussions, like, he actually had a deep appreciation for what others brought to the table. And by thinking that way, and by bringing in what others brought and appreciate them, you are setting yourselves up for getting something which is good, something that's truthful. It's never easy. Nobody ever said it was going to be easy. But at least that importance of and the value of it was clear. I know I'm kind of rambling here, but it's we talk about the arc they went through. Actually, there's companies that have gone through arcs, and these are complicated stories. They're rich, and it's. I think that when they work well, it's because the people thought about it and don't take for granted the people around them or the things that took place, or for that matter, even take for granted the accidents that enabled them.
Mm-hmm. Ed, these are, only to use your phrase, beautiful ramblings. Very appreciative of your time today. Thank you for being on the podcast.
Thank you, Greg. I really enjoyed talking with you.